The day he buried his son, the mountains were silent, not the peaceful kind of silence that brings comfort, but the kind that feels like something has been taken and the world hasn't decided how to respond yet. And as he stood there with frozen ground beneath his boots and cold air cutting into his lungs, he realized something that terrified him more than death itself. The mountains had not taken his son by accident. They had taken him with purpose. No body was ever found, no trail that made sense, no sign of struggle that could be followed, just a single broken path in the snow that ended abruptly at the edge of nothing, as if the boy had simply stepped out of reality itself and into something unseen, something that did not belong to maps, to rescue teams, or to anything the world recognized as normal. And every person who came to search had said the same thing in different ways: exposure, disorientation, avalanche drift. But none of those explanations answered the one question that refused to leave him: how does a trained mind, a careful step, a child who knew those mountains better than most adults, just disappear? He had been a man who understood terrain, danger, survival, the kind of man who had walked through places where the ground itself was trying to kill him, where every sound mattered, every shadow had meaning, and every mistake had consequences. But this was different, because war had rules, even chaos has patterns, but what happened here had none. The retired Navy SEAL in him had searched for logic in the first hours, then in the first days, then in the weeks that followed, but logic had failed him completely, leaving behind only one thing: instinct, the same instinct that had saved him in places no one else could survive, and that instinct refused to accept the conclusion everyone else had already moved on from. The white German shepherd never accepted it either. From the moment the boy vanished, the dog had changed, not in a way that was obvious to others, but in the small details that only someone who understood it could see: the way it stopped sleeping deeply, the way it lingered at doors, the way it returned again and again to the same spot on the mountain where the trail ended, as if it knew something had been left behind, something that others couldn't detect. It wasn't grief the way humans experience it, it was something sharper, more focused, a refusal to let the trail go cold. Weeks turned into months, and the world moved on the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission, but he couldn't, because something inside him refused to close that chapter, refused to accept that this was just another loss to be buried and carried forward. And then one night, when the storm rolled in heavier than anything that season had brought so far, when visibility dropped to nothing and the wind howled through the valley like something alive, the dog did something it had never done before. It didn't wait. It didn't hesitate. It moved. Straight toward the mountain. Not in panic. Not in confusion. But with certainty. The kind of certainty that stops a man in his tracks. The seal watched it for a moment, just long enough to understand that this was not random behavior, not instinct reacting to noise or movement, but direction, purpose, and that same instinct inside him, the one that had refused to stay silent since the day his son disappeared, came alive again with a force he hadn't felt in months. He followed. Not because he believed, but because he needed to know. The storm swallowed them quickly, snow rising around their legs, wind tearing across their bodies, visibility shrinking to a few feet at best, but the dog didn't slow down, didn't second guess, didn't lose direction. It moved like it was following something that had never faded, something that had been there the entire time waiting to be seen again. The path they took was not one he recognized. And that alone was wrong. Because he knew those mountains. Every ridge. Every valley. Every hidden drop. But this path didn't belong. The deeper they moved, the quieter the storm felt, not because it had weakened, but because something about the terrain was absorbing the sound, muting it, changing it, and that shift sent a cold realization through him that had nothing to do with temperature. This wasn't just a place he didn't know. This was a place that shouldn't exist. The dog stopped. Not suddenly. Not sharply. But with purpose. Standing at the edge of a narrow descent that wasn't visible from above, a cut in the mountain that looked natural at first glance but felt wrong the longer he looked at it. The dog looked back at him. And in that moment, something changed. Because for the first time since his son disappeared, he felt it. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. something dangerous. Because hope in a place like this can get you killed. The dog stepped down into the unknown. And without another second of hesitation, he followed. Because whatever was waiting down there had taken his son, and now it was calling them back. The moment his boots crossed into that narrow descent, the world above seemed to disappear, not gradually, not in a way the mind could adjust to, but instantly, as if the mountain had drawn a line between what was known and what was hidden, and everything behind him no longer existed in the same way it had before, because the wind that had been screaming moments ago faded into something distant, something muted. And the snow beneath his feet felt different, denser, less disturbed by natural flow, as if this place had not been touched by the same storm that covered the rest of the mountain. The white German shepherd moved ahead without hesitation, its body low but steady, paws placing with precision as if it had walked this exact path before, and that realization sent a sharp tension through the seal's chest, because there had been no previous search route here, no recorded trail, no visible entry from above, and yet the dog moved like it wasn't discovering the way, it was returning to it. He slowed slightly, not out of fear, but out of calculation, eyes scanning every detail, the angle of the descent, the spacing of rocks along the sides, the unnatural way snow clung to certain surfaces but avoided others, and the more he observed, the clearer it became that this was not just a hidden path, it was a concealed one, shaped in a way that prevented it from being seen unless you were already standing inside it. That detail alone broke something fundamental in his understanding of the terrain, because mountains don't hide things intentionally, they reveal them over time, erosion, weather, exposure, but this felt different, as if the path had been protected from those natural processes, preserved. The air grew colder as they descended, not the surface-level cold carried by wind, but a deeper, heavier cold that settled into the lungs and stayed there, and with it came a silence that was too complete, not empty, but controlled, like sound itself was being absorbed before it could travel. He could still hear his own steps, still hear the faint crunch beneath his boots, but even that felt dampened, as if the space around him resisted noise, and that resistance sharpened every other sense he had, because in environments where sound is suppressed, movement becomes everything. The dog stopped briefly, just for a fraction of a second, lifting its head slightly, ears forward, not reacting to something immediate, but confirming something already known, and then it continued deeper, further into a descent that should have opened into a valley or a ridge line by now, but didn't. Instead, the path curved, subtly at first, then more clearly, bending in a way that did not match the natural flow of the mountain, and that curvature disoriented something deep in his spatial awareness, because his instincts told him one thing, this path should lead outward, but his senses told him something else entirely, it was leading inward. The realization came slowly, but once it did, it didn't leave. They were not descending the mountain. They were entering it. He stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough for the weight of that thought to settle. The dog turned back immediately, not with confusion, not questioning the pause, but with expectation, as if it already knew what he was thinking, as if it had anticipated the hesitation, and in its eyes there was no doubt, no uncertainty, just direction. And that was when the seal made the decision. Not out loud. Not dramatically. But internally. The kind of decision that changes everything without needing to be spoken. He moved again. Following. Because whatever was ahead had already taken something from him. And turning back now would mean accepting that loss as final. The path narrowed further, forcing him to angle his body slightly to pass through sections where rock closed in on both sides, snow thinning here, replaced by a surface that felt harder, older, untouched by recent weather, and that shift in terrain changed the entire atmosphere, because now it no longer felt like an outdoor environment, it felt enclosed, contained, as if the mountain itself had formed a boundary around this space. A faint sound reached him then. So faint he almost dismissed it at first. Not wind. Not movement of snow. Something else. A distant echo. Not loud enough to identify clearly, but enough to register. The dog heard it too. Its ears shifted instantly. body tightening. But it didn't stop. If anything, it moved faster. The seal followed without hesitation this time. Because that sound, even in its faintness, carried something he hadn't felt in months. A possibility. And possibility is more dangerous than fear. Because fear keeps you alive. But possibility makes you take risks. The descent leveled out suddenly, without warning, opening into a space that should not have existed inside the mountain, not at that depth, not with that structure, because what lay ahead was not a tunnel, not a cave, but something wider, something shaped, something that held form in a way that felt deliberate. The storm was completely gone now. Not faded. Not reduced. Gone. Replaced by a stillness that pressed in from all sides. The dog slowed. For the first time. Not stopping. But adjusting. Its movements more cautious now. More aware. And that shift changed everything. Because until now, it had been leading. Now, it was preparing. The seal stepped forward into the open space. And what he saw did not make sense. Snow. Still present. But undisturbed. No wind. No falling flakes. No movement. Just a silent layer stretching across a flat expanse that should not exist inside a mountain. And beyond it, structures. Faint. Distant. Barely visible through the dim light filtering from somewhere unseen above. Not natural formations. Not rock. But shapes. Angles. Lines that belong to something built. Something placed. Something hidden. His breath slowed. Not from calm. But from focus. Because now the question had changed. This was no longer about where his son had gone. It was about where he had ended up. The dog stepped forward onto that silent snow. And paused again. Looking back. Waiting. And in that moment, the seal understood something that sent a chill deeper than the cold around him. This place was not lost. It was hidden. And whatever had taken his son lived here. The first thing that felt wrong was not what he saw, but what he didn't hear, because even in the deepest mountains, even in the most isolated valleys, there is always something, wind brushing across surfaces, distant cracking of ice, the low whisper of moving snow. But here, standing at the edge of that open space inside the mountain, there was nothing, no natural sound, no movement carried through air. Only a stillness so complete it pressed against his ears like pressure, and that silence alone told him this place did not follow the same rules as the world above. He stepped forward slowly, his boots sinking slightly into the untouched snow, and even that movement felt muted, as if the ground itself absorbed the sound before it could exist, and the white German shepherd moved just ahead of him, no longer charging forward with certainty, but walking with controlled caution, its body lowered slightly, ears forward, eyes scanning every direction, not searching blindly, but reading something in the environment that had shifted since they crossed into this space. The structures ahead became clearer with each step, and what had first appeared as distant shapes now revealed themselves as something far more defined, buildings, but not in any way he recognized from the modern world, not abandoned cabins, not broken shelters, but intact, standing, arranged in a pattern that suggested intention, planning, community. And that realization struck harder than anything else so far. Because places like this do not exist without record, without maps, without history. And yet this one stood here, hidden beneath layers of mountain and silence, as if it had never been meant to be found. His breathing slowed, not from calm, but from control, because stepping into something unknown requires a different kind of focus, one that keeps emotion contained and instinct sharp. And he needed both now more than ever. The dog stopped again. This time fully. Its body still. Its gaze fixed on something ahead. Not moving. Not reacting. Just watching. And that was the moment the seal felt it too. Not a sound. Not a movement. But a presence. The kind that doesn't reveal itself through noise, but through awareness, the subtle shift in atmosphere that tells you you are no longer alone, even if you cannot yet see what is watching you. He didn't turn his head immediately, didn't scan wildly, because that kind of reaction exposes uncertainty, and uncertainty invites attention, and right now he needed to observe without being observed, to understand before reacting. The buildings ahead stood silent, their surfaces covered in a thin layer of snow that had not been disturbed, no footprints, no signs of recent movement, no smoke, no light, nothing that suggested life, and yet everything about them felt wrong in a way that suggested the opposite, that life was present here, just not visible, not yet. He took another step forward, then another, each one deliberate, each one measured, and with every step, that feeling of being watched grew stronger, not threatening, not aggressive, but aware, as if something was studying him the same way he was studying the environment. The white German shepherd shifted slightly, moving closer to him now, not retreating, not afraid, but aligning itself with him in a way that signaled something had changed. The dynamic had shifted from exploration to readiness, and that shift sent a clear message through him. They were no longer just entering unknown territory, they were inside it now. A faint sound reached him. Soft. Distant. Almost like breath. He turned his head slightly. Not fast. Not sharply. Just enough to catch it again. And there it was. Movement. At the edge of one of the structures. Not clear. Not fully visible. But enough to confirm. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. The dog saw it too. Its body tensed. Not aggressively. But with focus. Its eyes locked onto that same point. And then it did something unexpected. It stepped forward. Not toward the man. Not toward safety. But toward the presence. Slow. Controlled. Purposeful. And that movement changed everything. Because this wasn't fear. This wasn't hesitation. This was recognition. The seal followed immediately. Not because he understood, but because he trusted the dog's instinct more than his own perception in this moment. They moved together across the silent snow, closing the distance between them and the structure, and with each step, the shape became clearer, a figure, standing partially in shadow, still, unmoving, its outline blurred by dim light and distance, but undeniably human in form, and that alone sent a sharp tension through him, because if someone was here, living here, then everything about this place changed from impossible to hidden truth. He stopped a few steps away. Not too close. Not too far. The dog stood slightly ahead of him. Between him and the figure. Not blocking. But positioned. Protective. Ready. The silence stretched. Seconds that felt longer than they should. And then the figure moved. Not suddenly. Not aggressively. Just a step forward. Slow. Measured. Revealing more of itself. A face. Pale. Still. Eyes locked onto him with a depth that did not feel hostile, but did not feel welcoming either. And then, something happened that broke everything he thought he understood. The dog relaxed. Not fully. But enough. Its posture softened slightly. Its ears lowered just a fraction. Not in submission, but in recognition. And that single reaction sent a shock through the seal's entire system. Because the dog did not trust easily. Did not misread. Did not lower its guard without reason. Which meant one thing. Whoever this was not a threat. Or at least, not in the way he expected. The figure spoke. Quiet. Calm. Not loud enough to echo. But clear enough to reach him. And the words did not ask who he was. Did not question why he was there. They said something else entirely. You took longer than expected. The seal didn't respond immediately. Because those words carried meaning. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Expectation. As if his arrival was not a surprise. As if this path, this place, this moment had been waiting for him. The dog stepped forward again. Closer now. Closing the final distance between them and the figure. And the seal followed. Because now, this was no longer a search. This was an answer. And somewhere inside this hidden village was the truth about what happened to his son. He did not answer the figure immediately, not because he didn't have words, but because something deeper than language had already taken hold of the moment, something that slowed everything down just enough for him to understand that this was no longer about control, no longer about leading or reacting, but about stepping into something that had already been set in motion long before he arrived. And as he stood there in the silent snow with the white German shepherd slightly ahead of him and the unknown figure watching with a calm that did not belong in a place like this, he realized that whatever this village was, it was not surprised to see him, and that alone carried more weight than anything else so far. The wind did not reach this place, the storm above might as well have belonged to another world entirely, because here the air remained still, heavy, controlled, and the silence was not empty, it was occupied, filled with something that could not be seen but could be felt in the way the body reacts without permission, the way muscles stay slightly tense even when there is no visible threat, the way breathing becomes measured without conscious thought. And he recognized that feeling immediately. Not from fear, but from experience, because he had felt it before in places where something was watching from the shadows without revealing itself. The figure stepped aside slowly, not as an invitation, not in a welcoming gesture, but in a way that simply removed itself from the path ahead, and that movement alone told him what he needed to know. This was not a place where entry was denied, but it was also not a place where entry was encouraged. It simply allowed itself to be entered, and what happened after that was something else entirely. The dog moved first, again without hesitation, stepping past the figure and onto the deeper stretch of snow that led between the structures, and the seal followed, every step deliberate, every sense alert, because even though the figure had not shown hostility, that did not mean safety existed here, it only meant that whatever danger this place held did not reveal itself in ways he was used to. As they moved further into the village, the details became clearer. The structures were not broken, not abandoned, but maintained, not in a modern way, not with visible signs of repair or upkeep, but in a way that suggested time did not affect them the same way it affected everything else in the world above. The surfaces were clean but not fresh, the snow rested on rooftops and edges but did not collapse under weight, as if it had settled into a permanent state rather than something temporary. And there were no tracks anywhere, not human, not animal, nothing to indicate movement despite the clear existence of presence, and that contradiction tightened something inside him, because environments like this do not exist without activity, without interaction, without signs of life, and yet here, life was implied, but not visible. The dog slowed slightly, its movements now more controlled than before, not cautious in fear, but aware in a way that suggested it was processing something deeper than simple surroundings, its eyes moving not just across what was in front of it, but scanning the spaces between structures, the shadows where nothing moved but something felt present, and that shift in behavior mirrored what the seal was beginning to understand. This place did not operate on visible rules, it operated on something else, something that required a different kind of awareness. A faint sound reached him again. Not distant this time. Closer. Soft. Almost like a whisper carried through still air. He turned his head slightly, tracking it, but there was nothing there, no visible source, no movement, just the same silent structures and untouched snow, and yet the sound had been real, he knew it, because instinct does not fabricate something like that without reason, and as he stood there listening, the realization settled deeper. The silence here was not the absence of sound, it was the suppression of it. Something was absorbing it, controlling it, keeping it contained. The figure behind them did not follow. That detail did not escape him. Because in places where control exists, observation usually follows, and yet here, they had been allowed to move forward without being trailed, without being monitored in any visible way, and that suggested something far more unsettling, that they did not need to be followed to be watched. The dog stopped again. This time near the center of the village. Its body completely still. Its eyes fixed on a structure slightly larger than the others. Not by much. But enough. And something about that building felt different, not in size, not in shape, but in presence, the same way certain places carry weight without explanation, The same way certain locations feel significant even when nothing about them visually suggests it. The seal stepped forward slowly. Closer. Closer. And then he felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. But a shift. Inside. The kind of shift that doesn't come from the outside world, but from something internal recognizing something it has been searching for. The dog moved toward the structure. Slow. Deliberate. And then it stopped at the entrance. Not entering. Not hesitating. Just waiting. Looking back at him. And in that moment, everything aligned. Because this was not random. This was not exploration. This was a path. A path that had been followed before. A path that led somewhere specific. Somewhere important. Somewhere connected to what he had lost. His hand tightened slightly at his side. Not from fear. But from readiness. Because whatever was inside that structure was the next step. And possibly the answer. He moved forward. Closing the final distance. Standing beside the dog. Looking at the entrance. And for the first time since stepping into this hidden place, he felt something break through the controlled calm inside him. Not fear. Not doubt. But something far more dangerous. Hope. And hope in a place like this could either bring him back what he lost, or destroy what was left of him completely. The dog stepped inside. And without another second, he followed. Because whatever waited in the dark beyond that doorway knew he was coming, and had been waiting for a very long time. The door to the structure opened with a sound that did not belong to this place, not the creak of old wood or the scraping of rusted metal, but a soft, almost reverential slide, as if the entryway itself was acknowledging their arrival, and as the darkness of the interior met the light from the snow outside, he felt the temperature drop, not sharply, but subtly, as if the air itself thickened, and with each step he took, the feeling grew stronger, that sense that the space within was not simply a shelter, but a vessel, holding something that did not conform to the world he knew. The white German shepherd entered first, its body low, every muscle tuned to the space, its ears forward, its senses sharply attuned to whatever lay within the shadows of this room, and as it moved deeper into the interior, its tail tucked slightly, not out of fear, but out of something else, something he couldn't quite place, something instinctive, something primal. He followed, his boots pressing softly into the cold, perfectly undisturbed ground, the air inside heavier than it should have been, thick with an old, stagnant energy that seemed to have settled into the walls, into the very floor beneath his feet. The moment he stepped fully inside, the door behind him closed quietly, not with a slam, not with a harsh finality, but with a soft, almost imperceptible hum, and as the door clicked shut, the sensation of being watched grew so overwhelming that it was almost suffocating, like 100 eyes were upon him, though he could see no one, and his breath caught slightly in his chest, not from fear, but from an understanding that this place was far older than the mountains themselves, as if it had always been here, waiting, buried beneath the weight of time and snow, forgotten by the world, hidden from memory. His eyes adjusted quickly to the dim interior, a pale light filtering from above, casting long shadows across what appeared to be a large open space. But it wasn't a room in the traditional sense, there were no walls to define it, just a vast, empty expanse, and in the center of it, towering and immense, was a structure of stone, half obscured by the gloom, its surface smooth and unmarked, as if it had never been touched by time. And the edges were soft, rounded, not jagged like the rest of the natural terrain, but shaped, purposeful, designed, and his heart skipped once as he took in the full scope of what lay ahead, because this was no natural formation, no cave, no abandoned building, it was something else entirely, something constructed, and that construction wasn't for shelter, it was for something far deeper, far older. The dog moved towards it, still calm but purposeful, each step measured, as though it had walked this path countless times before, and it stopped just in front of the stone structure, looking back at him as if to say, "This is where it ends." And in that moment, the seal felt his heartbeat slow, the air growing thicker, and every muscle in his body tensing, not because of danger, but because he understood something in the pit of his stomach that made everything inside him churn. This place was not just a hidden village, it wasn't just some forgotten secret lost in the mountains, it was a tomb. The thought hit him with such force that it took a moment to steady himself. This wasn't just a burial ground, though. It was something more, something preserved, untouched, like a memory that had never faded, and the walls, or the structure, whatever it was, seemed to hum with energy, an unspoken power that seemed to pulse faintly through the air, as though it was alive, or had been alive once, and he had no idea what kind of forces could create a place like this. A place so far outside anything he had ever known that even his experience, as a Navy SEAL, as a man hardened by war, by death, by loss, felt trivial in comparison to the weight this place carried. The German shepherd stood perfectly still now, its gaze fixed on the structure, eyes unblinking, not with fear, but with a deep understanding, and the SEAL took a step forward, just one, as his instincts kicked in, pulling him closer despite the terror that began to creep through his bones. As he approached, the air thickened even more, and his skin prickled with a chill that wasn't from the cold, but from something else, something far more ancient, and he could almost hear the whispers that seemed to reverberate against his eardrums, faint at first, like distant voices just beyond the threshold of hearing, and then the whispers grew louder, more distinct, a murmur of voices that filled the space with a sound that shouldn't exist. A sound that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. He stopped again, not out of fear, but to listen, and as he stood there, he realized that the voices were not saying words, they were saying names, soft whispers of names that swirled in the air like a forgotten chant, and his heart raced again as he listened harder, trying to make sense of the faint echoes. And then, like a slap in the face, his son's name cut through the murmur, sharp and clear, and for a moment, his vision blurred, his breath catching in his throat as the realization hit him. Like a wave. His son was here. Not in the form of a body, not in the way he had once known him, but here, in this place, in this forgotten space, and whatever had happened to him, whatever had taken him from the world above, had led him here. The dog moved again, stepping closer to the stone structure, and this time the SEAL did not hesitate. His body moved on its own, guided by that same instinct that had kept him alive through countless missions, through countless fights, through the broken pieces of his past, and he followed the dog, every step taken with a heavy heart, every movement measured, because even though he had lost so much, even though he had been broken, even though this was the moment when everything had seemed to spiral into nothingness, something inside him refused to accept it. He couldn't give up, not yet, not when the dog had led him here, to this place, to the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. As he approached the structure, a deep, unsettling sensation surged through him, and without thinking, he reached out to touch the stone, and the moment his fingers made contact with its smooth, cold surface, a pulse of energy surged through his body, so intense and sharp that it forced the air from his lungs and dropped him to his knees, and in that moment, his mind filled with images, flashes of memories, of pain, of loss, but also of something else, something hidden beneath the surface, and the dog's deep, knowing gaze never left him, as if it understood the transformation that had just begun. The moment his fingers touched the surface of the stone, a sudden surge of energy coursed through him, as though the very earth beneath him had come alive, breathing, pulsing with some unknown force that was both ancient and terrifyingly powerful. It wasn't just the cold that struck him. This wasn't just the frigid air of the mountain. This wasn't the chill of the blizzard that still raged outside the village. No, this cold was deeper, more profound, as though it emanated from within the stone itself, from the heart of the mountain, from something that had been buried here for longer than he could comprehend. His chest tightened as the world around him began to shift, and for a moment, he thought he might pass out, the pressure mounting within his skull, his heart pounding against his ribs in a wild, desperate rhythm. But it was the dog that kept him grounded. Its unwavering presence by his side, its strong, steady gaze that never wavered, brought him back to reality when everything else seemed to fade. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind, but it was as though the very stone he touched had unlocked something within him, a gateway to thoughts and memories that weren't his own. The whispers, faint at first, now grew louder in his mind. They were not just words anymore, they were voices, distinct, familiar, but foreign all at once. His son's name echoed again, reverberating through his body, and with it came the realization that these were not just echoes of the past. This wasn't just his mind playing tricks on him. These were the voices of the lost, of those who had disappeared into the mountains long ago, whose names had been forgotten, whose bodies had never been found. But they were not gone. Not in this place. They were alive, or perhaps not alive in the way he understood, but they existed here, within the walls of this hidden village, trapped between worlds, caught in the space where the living and the dead could no longer distinguish themselves. The dog stood still beside him, its eyes fixed on him, unwavering, as if it understood exactly what he was experiencing, as if it too could hear the voices that now filled his mind. He had always trusted the dog's instincts, always believed in its ability to lead him when his own senses failed, but now he was faced with something beyond instinct. This was not just survival. This was not just a rescue. This was a search for something far more elusive, something that could either heal him or destroy him, and the dog was his only guide through this place. He pulled his hand away from the stone, his fingers trembling, the cold seeping deep into his bones, but the moment he did, the pressure in the air seemed to lessen, the weight on his chest lifted, and the whispers, though still present, grew quieter, less urgent. The dog didn't move, but its stance softened slightly, as if it was waiting for something. Waiting for him. As he stepped back, his eyes moved upward, tracing the shape of the stone structure before him. It was not just a monument, or a piece of ancient architecture, it was something more, something that had been designed with purpose. There were symbols etched into its surface, symbols that seemed to pulse with a subtle energy of their own. They weren't unfamiliar, yet they were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were not from any culture he recognized, not from any language he had encountered in his years of service or study. They seemed alien, otherworldly, as though they had come from a time and place that existed long before human history had been written. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that these symbols were not just decorative, they were a language, and in that moment, he knew that the key to understanding this place, to understanding what had happened to his son, lay within these markings. But he couldn't decipher them. Not yet. He wasn't sure if he ever could. But the dog seemed to understand. It moved forward again, this time not to the structure itself, but to the opening in the stone, the entrance that he had barely noticed before, hidden in plain sight. The dog stepped through it without hesitation, its body sliding easily through the narrow gap, disappearing into the darkness beyond, and the seal followed immediately, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air shifted again. It was warmer now, but not in a comforting way. It was warmer in the way a place feels when it's been sealed off from the outside world for far too long, when the air has become stagnant, thick with the weight of time. The shadows inside the stone structure were deep, stretching across the floor like living things, and the further he moved in, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the darkness. It was the sense of being trapped, of being pulled deeper into a place where escape was no longer an option. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he ignored them, because for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought dead inside him: hope. A fleeting, dangerous thing that made him push forward, even as the path ahead became darker and more uncertain. He followed the dog deeper into the structure, the white German shepherd leading him with an unwavering certainty, its every step purposeful, its eyes scanning the shadows, alert to everything around it. The walls of the cavernous space seemed to close in on him, the ceiling so high that he could barely make out the outlines in the dim light. The deeper they went, the more he felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the more he felt that this place had never been meant for the living to enter. And yet, here he was, walking into the heart of the unknown. Walking into the heart of a mystery that had taken his son and had buried itself in the mountain, waiting for someone to find it. The dog stopped again, just a few feet ahead of him, its body stiff and its gaze fixed on something in the distance. He approached cautiously, but his heart was racing. Whatever was ahead was the answer to everything, the truth about his son, about the village, about the forces that had drawn him here. And as he stepped forward, the air shifted once again, and the darkness seemed to part, revealing a hidden chamber, its floor covered in ancient symbols, the same markings he had seen on the stone outside, only now they were etched into the very ground beneath him. The chamber was alive with a low, humming energy, and as he stepped inside, he felt it, something that had been waiting for him, something that had been waiting for someone to come and unlock the secrets buried within this place. And as the door closed behind him, he knew there was no turning back. The chamber did not welcome him, it acknowledged him, and there was a difference so subtle yet so heavy that it settled into his chest the moment his boots crossed fully onto the etched floor, because the symbols beneath him were not just markings, they were active, not glowing in the way something obvious would reveal itself, but shifting slightly in perception, like they were reacting to his presence rather than illuminating it. And the low hum that filled the air was not a sound that came from a source, it came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground, through the walls, through his bones, aligning with something deeper than hearing, something instinctive, something that recognized pattern before logic could catch up. The white German shepherd stood just ahead, completely still now, its posture no longer cautious but anchored, as if it had reached a point where movement was no longer necessary, where whatever needed to happen next would not come from searching but from waiting, and that shift sent a quiet signal through him that this was no longer a place to explore, this was a place where something would reveal itself when it chose to. He took another step forward. Slow. Measured. And the moment his weight pressed fully onto the center of the chamber, the hum changed. Not louder. Not stronger. But clearer. As if it had been waiting for that exact position to align. The air tightened slightly, not physically, but perceptually, like the space around him had narrowed into focus, and then the symbols beneath his feet shifted again, not moving across the surface, but deepening, becoming more defined in his vision, like his mind had finally caught up to something that had always been there. The whispers returned. But this time, they were not distant. They were close. Layered. Overlapping. Not chaotic. But structured. And for the first time, he understood them. Not fully. Not as language, but as intention. And within that intention, there was one presence that stood apart from all the others. Stronger. Closer. Familiar. The dog lowered its head slightly. Not in submission, but in recognition. And that was when the seal felt it. Not outside. Not in the chamber. But inside his own mind. A memory. Not recalled. But placed. Sharp. Immediate. Real. His son. Standing in the snow. Turning back. Looking at him. Not afraid. Not lost. But aware. The image hit with such force that it forced his breath out of his lungs, his body tightening instinctively, but he didn't fall, didn't step back, because something held him there, something deeper than balance, deeper than control, something that had already decided he would not leave this place the same way he entered it. The image shifted. Changed. Expanded. The snow around his son no longer belonged to the mountain above. It belonged to this place. This hidden village. This chamber. And suddenly everything aligned. Not perfectly. But enough. His son had not disappeared into nothing. He had crossed into this. The dog took one step forward. Then stopped again. And the seal followed. Because now there was no hesitation left. Only direction. The chamber seemed to deepen as he moved, not physically expanding, but revealing more of itself with each step, the shadows pulling back slightly, the symbols beneath his feet growing clearer, and ahead, at the far end of the space, something began to take shape. Not forming. Not appearing suddenly. But becoming visible. As if it had always been there, just beyond perception. A figure. Standing. Still. The seal's entire body locked into focus. Not fear. Not shock. But something heavier. Something that made movement feel slow and deliberate. Because recognition is not always immediate. Sometimes it builds, layer by layer, until it becomes undeniable. The figure stepped forward. Not quickly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to move out of the shadow. Enough for light to touch its face. And everything inside him stopped. Because what he saw was not a stranger, was not something unknown. It was him. But not as he remembered. Not as he had last seen him. Older. Not in age, but in presence. In stillness. In something that did not belong to the living world the same way anymore. His son stood there, looking at him. Not speaking. Not moving further. Just watching. The same way the figure at the entrance had watched. The same way this place watched. And in that silence, more passed between them than words could carry. The seal took a step forward. Then another. Each one heavier than the last. Because distance in that moment was not physical. It was something else. Something that had to be crossed carefully. The dog remained still. Did not move between them. Did not interfere. Because this moment was not about protection. It was about connection. The air around them shifted again. The hum lowering. The whispers quieting. As if everything else in this place had stepped back. Giving space. Allowing this moment to exist. The seal stopped just a few steps away. Close enough to see every detail. Every change. Every difference. And yet, every similarity. His son's eyes were the same. But deeper. Holding something that had not been there before. Something that carried weight. Understanding. And something else. Something that made the seal's chest tighten in a way he had not felt even in the worst moments of war. Acceptance. Not resignation. Not defeat. But acceptance of something that could not be undone. The seal's voice did not come easily. Not because he didn't know what to say. But because words suddenly felt too small for what this moment held. And when he finally spoke, it was not a question. It was not a command. It was something simpler. Something raw. "You're alive!" The words hung in the air. And his son's expression did not change. But something in his eyes did. A shift. A recognition. And then, finally, he spoke. Not loud. Not echoing. But clear. And the words that came did not answer what the seal had asked. They revealed something far more dangerous. "I didn't get lost." A pause. Not long. But heavy. "I was brought here." The seal didn't move. Didn't react outwardly. But inside. Everything shifted. Because that one sentence changed everything. This was not an accident. This was not disappearance. This was not survival gone wrong. This was intention. This place did not just exist. It chose. And it had chosen his son. And now, it had chosen him too. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and final, as if the chamber itself absorbed them and sealed them into the air between them, and for a long moment neither of them moved, because movement would have broken something fragile that had formed in that silence, something that held more truth than anything the seal had faced before, and he understood immediately that whatever this place was, whatever force had brought his son here, it did not operate on fear, it did not chase or hunt in. The way danger usually revealed itself, it waited, it selected, and once that selection was made, everything that followed unfolded with a precision that left no space for randomness, no space for chance. The white German shepherd remained still at his side, not stepping forward, not retreating, its presence grounded and unwavering, as if it too understood that this moment was not about action, not about protection, but about something far deeper, something that required stillness instead of movement, awareness instead of instinct. The seal's breathing slowed again, controlled, deliberate, because the training that had carried him through chaos now demanded something else entirely: patience, observation, understanding before reaction, and yet beneath that control, something far more human pushed forward, something raw, something that had been buried under months of silence and unanswered questions, something that could not be contained much longer. He took a step closer. Not fast. Not aggressive. But certain. And this time, his son did not remain still. He stepped forward too, mirroring the movement, closing the distance not out of urgency, but out of inevitability. Because whatever separated them now was no longer physical space. It was something else entirely. The seal stopped just within reach, close enough to see the smallest details. The slight change in posture. The stillness that replaced natural movement. The way his son's eyes held something that belonged to this place as much as it belonged to him. And for a moment, the world above, the mountain, the storm, the search, all of it faded, because none of it mattered here, none of it had any weight in this space, and that realization was more terrifying than anything else, because it meant that everything he had believed still connected them, no longer did. "You were taken?" he asked quietly, his voice steady but carrying an edge that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with truth, because he needed to understand the nature of this place before he could understand what it had done to his son, and the response came without hesitation, not rushed, not emotional, but clear. "No," his son said, his voice calm in a way that did not belong to someone who had been lost. "Not taken. Chosen." The word landed harder than anything else so far, because it removed the idea of victim completely. It replaced it with intention, and intention meant purpose, and purpose meant something had seen him, evaluated him, decided something about him that justified bringing him here, and that thought alone sent a cold realization through the seal's chest that had nothing to do with the environment around him, because if this place chose, then it had rules, and if it had rules, then there was something behind those rules. "Why?" the seal asked, the question coming sharper this time, not out of anger, but necessity, because every second he stood here without understanding brought him closer to a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face, and his son's eyes shifted slightly, not avoiding the question, but considering it in a way that suggested the answer was not simple, not something that could be given without consequence. "Because I crossed where I wasn't supposed to," he said finally, his voice still calm, still controlled, but carrying something deeper now, something that hinted at understanding rather than confusion. "Because I saw something that isn't meant to be seen, unless you're meant to stay." The seal felt that sentence more than he processed it, because it aligned too closely with everything he had already begun to realize: the hidden path, the silence, the way the storm disappeared, the way the structures existed without explanation. None of it was accidental, none of it was natural, it was all part of something designed, something maintained, something protected. "Then we leave," the seal said immediately, the words coming with certainty, not because he had a plan, not because he understood how, but because that was the only outcome that existed in his mind, the only option that mattered, and for the first time since they had seen each other, his son's expression changed, not dramatically, not visibly enough for someone else to notice, but enough for him, enough to see the shift. The hesitation that had not been there before. "You can't," his son said quietly. Not as a warning. Not as a threat. As a fact. The seal didn't respond immediately. Didn't argue. Didn't react. Because he had learned long ago that statements like that are not meant to be challenged emotionally. They are meant to be understood tactically, broken down, analyzed, tested. "Why not?" he asked, his voice lower now, steadier. Because now the situation had changed again. It was no longer about finding his son, it was about extracting him, and extraction always required understanding the boundaries first. His son looked at him for a long moment. And then he turned slightly. Not away. But toward the chamber itself. Toward the symbols. Toward the space that surrounded them. "This place doesn't let go of what it chooses," he said. The seal followed his gaze. And for the first time, he saw it differently. Not as a chamber. Not as a structure. But as a system. A contained environment where everything had purpose. Where everything functioned in alignment. And that meant one thing. If it chose, then it also controlled. The dog shifted slightly beside him. Not tense. Not aggressive. But alert. Because something else had changed. The air. The hum. The silence. All of it shifted just enough to register. And then, the whispers returned. Stronger. Clearer. No longer layered and distant. Now focused. Directed. And the direction was not random. It was toward him. The seal felt it immediately. The same pressure from before. But heavier now. More intentional. Like something was reaching. Testing. Measuring. And in that moment, he understood. This place had not just chosen his son. It was deciding whether to choose him too. His posture changed instantly. Subtle. But precise. Not defensive. Not aggressive. But controlled in a way that signaled something deeper than instinct. Because if this place operated on awareness, then he needed to control what it saw. The dog stepped forward slightly. Closer to him. Aligning. And that alignment mattered. Because whatever was happening now, they were facing it together. The seal looked back at his son. And for the first time since entering this place, he saw something else in his eyes. Not acceptance. Not calm. But concern. You shouldn't have come, his son said quietly. And that sentence carried something far heavier than the ones before it. Because it wasn't about regret. It was about consequence. The seal didn't respond. Because now there was only one thing that mattered. He had found his son. And whatever this place was, whatever it wanted, whatever it controlled, he was not leaving without him. But as the pressure in the air grew stronger, and the whispers began to form something closer to intention than sound, one truth became unavoidable. Leaving this place was not going to be a matter of choice. It was going to be a matter of survival. And this time, the enemy was not visible, not defined, not something he could fight in the way he understood. This time, he was inside it. And it was deciding what he was worth. Next part 9. The pressure did not come all at once, it built slowly, deliberately, like something tightening its grip without revealing the hand that held it, and the seal felt it not on his skin, not in the air around him, but inside his chest, inside his thoughts, as if something had reached past every external defense and begun measuring him from within, not judging in a human sense, not comparing or questioning, but scanning, evaluating, processing in a way that had no emotion attached to it, and that lack of emotion made it more dangerous than anything he had ever faced before, because enemies react, they hesitate, they make mistakes, but this, whatever this was, did none of those things. The white German shepherd stepped closer, its body aligned with his leg now, not blocking, not shielding, but grounding, anchoring him in a way that cut through the growing weight pressing against his mind, and he recognized immediately what the dog was doing, not physically protecting him, but stabilizing him, giving him a fixed point in an environment that was trying to shift everything else. The whispers sharpened. Not louder, but clearer. No longer fragments. Now patterns. Repeating. Layering. And within those patterns, he began to understand something he wasn't supposed to. Not language. Not words. But intent. The same intent that had taken his son. The same intent that had brought him here. It was asking something. Not out loud. Not directly. But through pressure. Through presence. Through the way the environment responded to him. And for the first time since entering this place, he realized he was not just being observed. He was being tested. His breathing slowed further. Not forced. Not controlled. But naturally. Because this was no longer about reacting to what he didn't understand. It was about understanding what was being asked of him. The dog remained still. Unmoving. Its eyes forward. Its body steady. As if it had already recognized this moment before it happened. As if it knew that this was the point where everything changed. The seal didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't break eye contact with his son. Because whatever this place was doing, it was reading more than actions. It was reading intent. And intent could not be faked. The pressure increased slightly. Not enough to overwhelm, but enough to push. To see how far he would bend. And he didn't. He held. Not out of defiance, but out of clarity. Because there was only one thing inside him that mattered in this moment. One purpose. One direction. He had not come here to understand this place. He had not come here to survive it. He had come here for one reason. To take his son back. And that truth settled into him completely. Clean. Uncomplicated. Unbreakable. The whispers shifted. Changed pattern. Not resisting. Not pushing harder. But adjusting. As if the system itself had recognized the clarity of his intent. His son took a step forward. Closer now. Close enough that the distance between them no longer felt like separation. But transition. "You don't understand what this is," his son said quietly, his voice still calm, but carrying something deeper now, something that felt less like warning and more like truth being offered for the last time. "This place doesn't just take people, it changes them." The seal didn't respond. Not immediately. Because he could already see that. Not in a physical sense. Not in something obvious. But in the way his son stood. The way he moved. The way he spoke. There was no fear in him. No urgency. No desire to leave. And that was more unsettling than anything else. "Then it hasn't changed me," the seal said finally, his voice low, steady, grounded in something that did not belong to this place, something that came from years of surviving environments that were designed to break people, and his son's expression shifted again, just slightly, just enough to show that the statement had landed. "You're still early," his son replied. And that sentence carried something dangerous. Because it implied time. Process. Transformation. The seal felt the pressure shift again. This time more focused. More direct. Not testing broadly anymore. Now targeting. And he understood immediately. The moment had reached its edge. This place was no longer observing. It was deciding. The dog moved. Just a step. But it changed everything. Because that step was not toward the chamber. Not toward the unseen force pressing around them. It was toward his son. Placing itself between them. Not aggressively. Not defensively. But intentionally. And that movement disrupted something. The pressure paused. Just for a fraction of a second. But enough. Enough for the seal to recognize what had just happened. The dog was not just grounding him. It was interfering. Breaking the pattern. Interrupting the process. And that meant one thing. This place did not fully control everything inside it. The seal moved instantly. Closing the remaining distance between him and his son. Not rushing. Not attacking. But decisive. His hand reached out. Gripping his son's arm. Solid. Real. Not an illusion. Not a projection. And in that contact, everything shifted. The pressure surged. The whispers snapped into clarity. The chamber reacted. Not violently. Not explosively. But with precision. Like a system correcting a disruption. The cymbals beneath their feet pulsed. Once. Then again. Stronger. And the air around them tightened rapidly. His son's eyes widened slightly. Not in fear. But in realization. "You shouldn't have touched me," he said. But the seal didn't let go. Because this was no longer about understanding the rules. It was about breaking them. The dog stepped closer. Pressing against both of them now. And for the first time since entering this place. It growled. Low. Controlled. Not in fear. But in defiance. And that sound cut through everything. The whispers fractured. The pressure destabilized. The chamber reacted again. Faster this time. More direct. And the seal felt it. The shift. The moment where observation ended. And resistance began. The system had made its decision. And it was not letting them leave. But the seal had already made his. And he wasn't staying. And now, for the first time since stepping into this hidden world, the fight had begun. Not against something he could see. Not against something he could strike. But against something that surrounded him completely. Something that controlled the ground beneath his feet. The air in his lungs. The silence in his ears. And the only thing standing between him and losing everything again was the grip he refused to release. And the white German shepherd that refused to back down. The chamber pulsed once more. Stronger than before. And the path they had taken to get here began to disappear. The moment the path began to collapse behind them, it wasn't a physical collapse the way rock breaks or snow gives way, it was something far more precise, far more controlled. The space itself seemed to fold inward, not violently but with intention, like a door closing without sound, sealing off what had already been passed, and the seal understood instantly that whatever chance they had to leave was no longer tied to retracing their steps. Because those steps no longer existed, they had been erased, absorbed back into whatever system governed this place, and that realization hit harder than anything else so far, because it removed the last familiar strategy from the equation. There would be no retreat, no fallback, no second attempt, only forward, only through. The pressure surged again, heavier now, focused, no longer testing, no longer measuring, but acting, and the symbols beneath their feet pulsed in rapid succession, not glowing, not lighting the chamber, but vibrating through it, sending waves through the ground that moved up through his legs, into his chest, into his skull, and the whispers that had once been layered and distant now snapped into something sharp, direct. Almost like commands trying to form without language, pushing against his thoughts, trying to reshape something inside him. He tightened his grip on his son's arm. Did not let go. Because contact mattered. He knew that now. Whatever this place was doing, it needed separation. It needed isolation. And as long as they remained connected, it could not complete whatever process it had started. The white German shepherd pressed harder against them both, its body a constant point of reality in a space that was trying to dissolve everything into something else, its low growl steady, unbroken, not reacting to what it could see, but to what it could feel, and that growl did something the seal hadn't expected. It created disruption, not in a loud or obvious way, but in the rhythm of the chamber itself. The pulses beneath their feet lost their perfect timing for just a fraction of a second. The whisper staggered, and that fracture, small as it was, revealed something critical. This place was not invincible. It was precise. And precision can be broken. His son pulled slightly. Not away. But uncertain. And that hesitation mattered more than anything. Because it meant something inside him was still resisting. Still fighting. You don't understand, his son said again, but this time the calm in his voice cracked just slightly, just enough to show that whatever control this place had over him was not absolute. It won't stop, it doesn't stop. The seal leaned in closer. Not forcing. Not dragging. But anchoring. It doesn't matter, he said, his voice steady, grounded in something that did not belong to this chamber, something built over years of surviving situations that should have ended him. I didn't come here to understand it. I came here to take you back. The words landed differently this time. Not absorbed. Not neutralized. They held. And the chamber reacted immediately. The pulses beneath them intensified. Faster. Stronger. The air compressed further. The whispers sharpened into something almost audible, almost forming meaning, almost breaking into something that could be understood as resistance. The dog barked once. Sharp. Explosive. And that single sound cut through everything like a fracture line. The pulses broke rhythm again. The pressure stuttered. And in that moment, the seal saw it. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. The chamber was not just reacting to them. It was reacting to disruption. To imbalance. To something that did not align with its system. And that gave him exactly what he needed. A weakness. He shifted his stance. Not pulling his son away. Not trying to force movement. But grounding himself deeper. stabilizing, creating resistance instead of escape. Because escape was no longer possible in the way he understood it. But disruption was. The dog moved again, circling slightly, not randomly, but deliberately, breaking the symmetry of the space, breaking the alignment. And every step it took caused the symbols beneath them to flicker out of sequence, just slightly, just enough to confirm what he was beginning to understand. This place functioned on balance, on pattern, on order, and they were breaking it. The seal took one step forward, pulling his son with him, not away from the chamber, but deeper into it. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because instead of resistance increasing, it faltered. Just for a second. But enough. Enough to confirm. This place did not expect forward movement. It expected compliance. It expected stillness. And they were giving it the opposite. His son's eyes changed again. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. Enough for recognition to break through the layer that had settled over him. Wait, he said, his voice uncertain now, the first true crack in the control that had held him since they entered. What are you doing? The seal didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. Breaking it, he said. Simple. Direct. And the dog stayed with them. Step for step. Growl steady. Presence unwavering. The chamber pulsed again. But this time, out of sync. The whispers fractured further. The pressure shifted erratically. Not focused anymore. Not controlled. And that loss of control spread quickly. The symbols beneath them flickered. Some fading. Some intensifying. But no longer uniform. The system was failing. Not collapsing. Not destroyed. But destabilized. And that was all he needed. Move, he said, pulling his son forward again. And this time, his son moved with him. Not resisting. Not hesitating. Because something inside him had broken free. Not fully. But enough. The chamber reacted violently now. Not with force. But with correction. The space around them began to shift. The walls, if they could be called walls, pulled inward slightly. The air tightened. The whispers surged. But it was too late. The pattern was broken. And once broken, it could not restore itself instantly. The dog barked again. Louder. Stronger. And the chamber responded with one final pulse. Massive. Overwhelming. Everything went silent. Completely. No hum. No whisper. No pressure. Just stillness. And in that stillness, the seal felt it. The absence. The release. The system had let go. Not willingly. But because it had to. Because it could no longer hold them within its pattern. The ground beneath them shifted once more. But this time, not inward. Outward. The space ahead opened. Not visibly at first. But perceptually. The same way the path had revealed itself before. The same way this place had hidden itself. Now, it was revealing an exit. His son staggered slightly. Breathing heavier now. Human again. More present. The seal didn't stop. Didn't look back. Because this place would try again if given the chance. The dog moved ahead. Leading. Fast now. Certain. And the seal followed. Pulling his son with him. Through the shifting space. Through the opening that did not exist until it did. And as they crossed that threshold, the storm hit them like reality snapping back into place. Wind. Snow. Sound. All of it returned at once. Violent. Loud. Alive. And behind them, the entrance was gone. No path. No opening. No trace. Just mountain. Just snow. Just silence. The seal dropped to one knee. Still holding his son. Breathing heavy. Real. Alive. The dog stood beside them. Calm now. Watching the mountain. Not in fear. Not in tension. But in understanding. Because it knew. That place still existed. Still hidden. Still waiting. But it had lost something. Something it had chosen. Something it had not been able to keep. The seal looked at his son. Really looked this time. And for the first time since everything began. He saw it. Not the weight. Not the change. But the life still there. And that was enough. More than enough. Because whatever that place had been, whatever it had tried to take, had not been stronger than what brought him there. Not stronger than the bond that refused to break. Not stronger than the instinct that refused to let go. The storm howled around them. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the world had returned. And as he stood there in the snow, with his son beside him, and the white German shepherd at his side, he understood something that no training, no war, no survival had ever taught him. Some things are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be faced, and survived, and left behind. And as they turned away from the mountain, one truth remained. The place that had taken his son still existed. But now, it knew something too. It had tried to choose him. And failed. And sometimes, that is the only victory that matters. The storm did not welcome them back gently. It hit them like a wall of reality crashing into something that had been suspended outside of time, wind slamming into their bodies with a force that reminded him instantly where they were, what world they belonged to, and more importantly, what they had just escaped from. And yet even as the cold tore through his jacket and snow stung against his face, there was something different now, something grounded. Something real, because for the first time, since his son disappeared, the mountain felt like a place again, not a question, not a void, not something that had taken and refused to return, but something that had been faced, entered, and survived. His grip on his son did not loosen immediately, not out of fear that he would disappear again, but because his body had not yet accepted that this was over, that the moment of contact, of connection, was no longer under threat, and his son stood there, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in a way that was unmistakably human, no longer held in that unnatural stillness, no longer anchored to that place beneath the mountain, and the shift in him was visible in the smallest details, the way his shoulders moved with each breath, the way his eyes scanned the storm not with distant awareness but with real, immediate presence, like someone who had just woken from something far deeper than sleep. The white German shepherd stood close, not restless, not alert in the way it had been inside that chamber, but steady, grounded, its role fulfilled but not finished, because even now it remained positioned slightly between them and the mountain, not aggressively, not protectively in the traditional sense, but with an awareness that lingered. As if it understood that whatever had happened was not something that could simply be walked away from without consequence, and that understanding settled into the seal as well, because even as he looked back at the slope behind them, at the place where the path had once existed, there was nothing there, no opening, no mark, no indication that anything had ever been there at all, just untouched snow and jagged rock, as if the mountain had erased the truth the moment they stepped out of it. He stood slowly, pulling his son with him, steadying him as the wind pushed against them, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because words in that moment felt unnecessary. Everything that needed to be understood had already passed between them in that chamber, in the silence, in the grip that had refused to break, and yet there was something else now, something that had not been there before, something fragile but undeniable. The beginning of something returning, not fully, not completely, but enough to matter. "We need to move," he said finally, his voice low but firm, not because he was unsure, but because staying here, standing still, looking back, carried a risk he did not fully understand, and his son nodded, not immediately, not sharply, but slowly, like someone relearning how to respond, how to act, how to exist in a world that no longer felt entirely familiar. And that was when the seal realized the truth of what his son had said inside that place. It hadn't just taken him, it had changed him. Not in a way that erased who he was, but in a way that layered something over him, something that would not disappear just because they had left, something that would remain, quiet, buried, but present. They began to move, step by step, pushing through the storm, the dog leading slightly ahead now, its movements confident again, certain, as if the path back was no longer hidden, no longer shifting, because the moment they had crossed out of that place, the mountain had returned to its natural state, predictable, harsh, but understandable, and that difference mattered more than anything else, because unknown danger breaks people. But known danger can be survived. Time passed in fragments, minutes stretching into something that felt longer under the weight of exhaustion and cold, but he didn't stop, didn't allow them to slow beyond what was necessary, because distance from that place was the only thing that mattered now, and the further they moved, the more the pressure inside his chest eased, the more the silence in his mind cleared, until eventually there was nothing left but the storm, the wind, the sound of their steps, and that was enough, more than enough. When they finally reached the lower ridge, where the terrain opened and the storm began to thin just enough to reveal the world beyond, he stopped again, turning back one last time, not out of curiosity, not out of doubt, but out of something deeper, something that needed closure even if closure was something that place refused to give, and as he looked at the mountain, at the endless stretch of snow and stone, there was nothing there. Nothing to mark what had happened, nothing to prove it had been real. And for a moment, a single, dangerous thought crossed his mind, that maybe it had all been something else, something imagined, something created by grief and loss and desperation, but that thought died instantly the moment he felt the weight of his son beside him, real, solid, alive, because no illusion could do that, no broken mind could bring back what had been taken, and that truth settled everything. They turned away from the mountain together, the dog moving ahead, the path now clear. And as they descended back toward the world they had come from, one thing remained certain: the place they had found was not gone, it was not destroyed, it was not defeated, it still existed somewhere beneath that mountain, hidden, waiting, choosing, but it had failed once, and that failure mattered, because it meant something inside it could be broken. Something inside it could be resisted, and that knowledge would stay with him longer than anything else, longer than the fear, longer than the uncertainty. Because in the end, survival is not just about escaping something dangerous, it is about understanding that it is not unstoppable, and as the storm faded behind them and the world slowly returned to something familiar, he tightened his grip once more, not out of fear this time, but out of something stronger. Something that had carried him through everything, something that had brought him into that place and back out again, something that even that hidden village could not take. And that was the only thing that mattered, because whatever existed beneath those mountains, whatever waited in silence, whatever watched from beyond what could be seen, it had made one mistake, it had chosen something it could not keep, and sometimes, that is enough to break even the most hidden of worlds.